Look, Khoisan aren't black?
No.
What are they?
They're a completely separate ethnicity all on their own. In fact, if you look at them, they're kind of yellowy. They're a light brown yellow color,
Right.
but they look more Asian than African. They do not consider themselves African.
Interesting.
Hello, what's up, good people? Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you're watching. Welcome back to the channel. If you're coming across this channel for the first time, welcome to the channel as well. Thank you very much for your time passing by here to check on what we have for you today in this video. So in this video, I have something for us, something interesting, and I just have a simple but maybe complex at the same time question for us to try and think, to try and jog our minds. And the question for you today is, what really makes us African? What is our Africanness? Or what do you think really makes people African? The people that are called African, what really makes them African? That is the question for you and for me today. Now, in this video, I have something for you. I want to show you a take by this white brother here, and on probably what he thinks is African from his perspective. And then from listening to him, watching him, then we will have maybe something to add to that. So let's go straight into this video.
Black people are not the original inhabitants of South Africa, which, in fact, they're realizing that now. When they claimed that they owned all the land, the original inhabitants, of whom there are not many left, said, excuse me, no, we were the original inhabitants. You guys were migrants here as well, which they were. Okay, the original inhabitants of Southern Africa are called the Khoisan. In the West, the Bushmen are Khoisan. Hottentots are Khoisan. But you can't use those words anymore. You now have to call them Khoisan. Okay? All right. Now, and they were the inhabitants of the whole of Southern Africa. So the whole of South Africa, at one stage, were Khoisan. The black people originated in what is now Cameroon. That's where they...
Hold on, Khoisan aren't black?
No.
What are they?
They're a completely separate ethnicity all on their own. In fact, if you look at them, they're kind of yellowy. They're a light brown yellow color,
Right.
but they look more Asian than African. They do not consider themselves African.
Interesting.
When the white guys arrive in Cape Town, so 1652 is when Dutch guys arrived there. At that stage, you could have divided South Africa almost exactly 50-50, what's now South Africa. The western half of the country was entirely Khoisan. There were no black people there. None at all. Only Khoisan. So we're Cape Towners, all that area, Khoisan people. The northern part of the country did have black people. They'd started arriving, and they were still migrating.
How long have they been there in the northern?
Well, it's a moot point, and people have debated it. It would seem that black people had probably started arriving in the northern parts of South Africa maybe 1,000 years, something like that, about 1,000 years before whites got there, right up in the north, okay? And they've been slowly moving south because it's an empty space. I mean, one of the things about Africa is it's very empty. Up until the 1950s, Africa was very empty. It's the population exploded because white colonists, the naughty white colonists, put hospitals there, and there's been this huge population explosion since the 1950s. But Africa was really very empty up until then. And so tribes moved around and just occupied new empty territory. So the guys coming down from the north, who called the Bantus, it's called the Bantu expansions, when black people came out of the Cameroons, they'd been occupying South Africa and moving systematically south, down the east coast
They were
of South Africa.
pastoralists, am I right?
Yeah, they were pastoralists, yeah. Whereas the Khoisan were hunter-gatherers. They were like aboriginals, okay, so they hadn't become pastoralists yet. The black guys are migrating down from the north and settling, doing exactly what white guys are doing. So white guys, the Dutch guys from Cape Town, were settling by moving westwards, eastwards. So the white guys are moving from Cape Town eastwards, and the black guys are moving down from the north. And they met at a place called the Fish River, which is now in the middle of South Africa at a place called, it's still called border. Everybody in South Africa calls that part of the country the border, even though there's no border there at all anymore. But there was a river called the Fish River, which is where blacks and whites first encountered each other. And then it started 100 years of warfare between whites and the Khoisan, who were the tribe that they met there. So, okay, so at that point, that would have been in about 1700. So whites and blacks first encountered each other in 1700. Okay? So whites had already been there for 100 years at that point.
Okay, so that is the video. So let's start from here. First, we go back to our question. Let's refresh the question. Our question for this video was, what really makes us African? What is it really that makes us African? Now, going back to this white brother, let's first check a few boxes. So, Southern Africa, the current day South Africa as a country, Namibia, Angola, and probably Botswana, the original indigenous inhabitants, or the longest, as long as we can look back in time, are the Khoisan people, the Khoi, who were actually pastoralists, and the San, who are originally hunter-gatherers. Generally, these people, because they are related, we just call them the Khoisan instead of the Khoi and the San. So the Khoisan, which so we check that box. They are the original or the earliest inhabitants of Southern Africa. What else do we agree on? That in the 1950s or the 1900s, or even before in the 1800s, Africa was relatively empty in terms of a human population. Okay, I agree. That's true. And so was America, the Northern American continent. So was the Southern American continent. So was Europe. And so was Asia. All of them have been empty. Emptier comparing to what it looks like today. Because, that's true. What else do I agree with? Maybe we check those boxes. Now, what is my problem essentially with this white brother? So this white brother, first, he tries to imply that Africa was empty, but the population of Africa, the black people, whatever he wants to say, whichever way he's trying to, he would prefer to describe these people. So their population exploded. Africa's population exploded suddenly upon the arrival of the white, he called them the naughty or notorious white colonialists, because apparently they build hospitals, so on and so forth. He's trying to say that actually Africa, as the fastest growing continent, the youngest and the fastest growing, is not exactly because white people came, but that is actually the global trend. I mean, population is continuing to grow. Population is not actually declining, but the population of people this time and 100 years before is not the same in any country. The population has continued to grow in Europe and in Asia. It's not been the same. So Africa, like the rest of the world, has had its population continue to grow. Africa of today and in the next 50 years will obviously have a higher population. We might be having a steeper graph in terms of population growth, but the general trend of the world population is that it is increasing. So African population did not explode because white colonialists came to build the hospitals. No, that's wrong. I do not agree with him. Now, but the bone of contention here is he's trying to say, or he's even said, that the Khoisan are not African. I find that ridiculous and ironical because, in fact, if anybody is really African, then the Khoisan are. Life began in Africa. That is irrefutable. That is not debatable. That life began in Africa. In fact, looking at the Khoisan people of Southern Africa today, if we were to trace back the earliest existing humans and give a relation to the modern humans, the Khoisan are a perfect reflection of the earliest humans in relation to the modern people that we have today, looking at their art, their culture, their history, their behaviorisms. So I don't know if whatever he's trying to imply by saying that the Khoisan are not African, I find that really funny. Now, this does ring a bell for me, or in my head, a bell of division. And white people have notoriously succeeded in doing one thing, especially to us black people, to divide us, division, the narrative of divide and rule, the tactic of divide and rule. They have done that, and they have used that as a one of the most effective tactic to subdue the African people, the black people. So by trying to say that the Khoisan, who are among the earliest trace of modern humans, are not African, while in fact life itself began in Africa, is probably trying to divide us again, trying to say these are not African like you, and you are more African than this. Because what is Africa in itself? What is Al-Kebula now, the modern Africa? I think in my perspective, you will share your perspective in the comments probably. One of the things that actually makes us African is geography, being from the African continent or having your roots in Africa, in the African continent. Two, and this is now the stronger point, it is our shared history and culture. Where have we come from? That's basically history. That actually makes us African. And that's why today we have black people across the entire globe. But those black people are always trying to get associated to Africa because of their roots. Their roots are likely from still traceable in Africa. Trying to say that the Khoisan, because of their lighter complexions, are not African is probably a very debatable and weak point for him, because looking at sub-Saharan Africa, let's for just for a moment and for context, let's omit the northern part of Africa, which was invaded by the Arabs and assimilated most of the indigenous people. Now, looking at the more pure sub-Saharan Africa, you will find that the people there are not exactly looking the same across the whole region of sub-Saharan Africa. People in the most central part of Africa, say the Democratic Republic of Congo, looking at their physical appearance, comparing the same people to people from the Far East, like where my country is, um, Eastern Africa, Kenya, and looking up towards Ethiopia and maybe parts of Uganda and Sudan and Southern Sudan, you find that these people don't look the same. But this does not mean that these people who trace their roots from the Nubian kingdom and the early Kemet kingdom are less African than those from the Congo Basin. People from the physical appearance of the people of Nigeria is not really the same if you compare it to the far, and Nigeria is to the far west of the country. If you compare it to the far east, looking at a country like Kenya or Somalia, those people don't exactly look the same. But I don't find that as being less African for the Kenyans, the Somalis, and Nigerians being more African, or Nigerians being less African, and these others being more African. It's just a way, in my view, in my understanding, it's just a way of trying to create a rift, a divide, which successfully they have done it. Now, again, I would want to bring to his notice, probably, and our notice, that Africa as a continent as it is today and what exists as over 50 countries, 54 countries, and with their individual governments and borders, was actually an initiative of the Western imperialist, rather the colonialist. The colonialist drew the nations of Africa as they exist today. Look at Southern Africa, the region that was originally occupied by the Khoisan people. Namibia, Angola, South Africa, Botswana. Those are 4 different countries that I have mentioned. But originally, Africa wasn't divided that way. And the people of Africa moved across and within the entire of its continent and even outside. So the migration of the Bantu people, who are also African, not more African than the Khoisan, and the Khoisan are not more African than the Bantu, moved in search of fertile land and progressively towards the south of the continent. And they found people that existed there already, the Khoisan, the Khoi, and the San people. And maybe displaced, assimilated, interacted, and shared their history together. But as African people, today, looking at, talking in my own case, looking at historically where my community dates back from, then I'd probably trace my roots to the upper Nile Valley, where the Nubian kingdom existed. The Kemet also existed. But then my community, being a community of pastoralists, were moving down following the Nile and looking for plains or flat pasture lands for their animals, and eventually found themselves in Eastern Africa, Kenya, and actually Tanzania, and traces down towards Malawi, and of course traces back into Sudan and South Sudan. So basically Africans, and then we also interacted looking at the composition of Kenya as a country, and then there is another group of Africans that moved. Now, during the Bantu expansion, moved from the Congo Basin towards the East and moved and interacted. And today, as a country, we have a huge diversity of people because we have Cushitic people, we have the Nilotic group of people, and we have the Bantu, and of course others that came later on outside of the continent of Africa. I'm probably not mentioning them, or they're not well pronounced because they are not as really African. Because look at the Indians of Kenya. They actually came from India during trade and during the colonization period. That is when they found themselves in Kenya. So that's very traceable. But looking at the Nilotes and the Kushites and the Bantus of Kenya, they just really came from another region of the same continent and just moved looking for land for their animals and for cultivation. So does that really okay? So what I'm trying to say is that the Bantu people moved towards the south and found another existing indigenous African group in the south. The borders as they exist were drawn by the white man during the scramble of Africa. It wasn't by the African people. And these borders somehow came to immobilize the African people because before then there were no restrictions in the continent of Africa and people used to move freely. But look at what happened. Today, it's harder to move from one African country by an African to another because of the restrictions that are a legacy, a direct legacy of colonization and slavery. Today, in America, for example, we still have people that call themselves, or they are called, the African Americans. And these are people that trace their ethnicity back into the continent of Africa. And how did they find themselves there? Generally, that is also a legacy of imperialism during the slave trade. Most of them during the transatlantic trade found themselves in the continent of um, America as it is today. It's funny that what should be talked about is even the white people that don't really call themselves white Americans or European Americans are also not the originals of the continent of Northern America and even Southern America. But the black people will always try to be reminded, even in that name, African American, that you guys come from Africa. But you people, you white people, also have your roots from Europe. So if black people, if we are African American, then you are European Americans. But who even uses the term European Americans? It's not used because they want to cover that and want to make it look like that they own the land. They do not own the land. The land had the original, the indigenous people of America that of course they decimated, unalived, and annihilated and stole from them and brought the black people to work on those lands. He's the brother, he's trying to force a point to look like, yo, we came to Africa. You know, do you get to realize there's a sort of entitlement of trying to say we equally came to Africa like you did come to Africa? Now, in this case, South Africa. He's trying to get to express an entitlement of white people in South Africa. South Africa. Africa is there for a purpose. In that name, there is a purpose. The Bantu might have come from wherever, but they came from Africa and they are in Africa. You came from somewhere else. Brother, I think he should have known that and he should have put that clear. But of course, because he's trying to force his space into being a South African, over the black people. Now he's trying to equate matters that he came by ship, he grabbed the land, that he's saying that other people that were originally there on that continent, just somewhere else. Now, for example, me being a Kenyan, staying in the capital, Nairobi, if I was to go to a different city, does that make me less of, I'm still a Kenyan who moved to another part of the same country? You see? So that is what I had for you today in this video. I don't know what you think of that video. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Give this video a thumbs up. Share this video with your friends and your family, and subscribe to this channel if you have not yet subscribed to this channel. Until next time, I will see you in the next video. Peace.